Hey, Tim, can you throw my slides up? That's the header. Oh, sorry. Let me go back one. Couple of real quick comments. First off, if everybody could turn their phones on vibrate, if you don't mind. Restrooms, if you haven't found them yet, they are out this door to the left, down by the escalators, and left again. Conference support, if you all run into any problems or need assistance, please see us at our Reg desk out front. Proceedings and evaluation. So we're recording everything right now via Zoom. Welcome virtual attendees. We will prepare a proceedings package that will have, we're going to put everything on a YouTube channel. So I'll send everybody that link first part of next week, along with all the presentations in PDF format. We have an attendees list that will go out. We typically do names and affiliations only to general registrants, and then our VIP registrants, sponsors, and exhibitors are going to get a list with full contact information. So if you do not want your contact information released, please let me know. Networking opportunities, all our breaks and receptions are next door. Lunch today, I believe, is going to be in Salon 9 and 10, which is upstairs. So we're going to have to go up the escalators, and we'll have direction signs to show everybody where we're going to be. We have a Topgolf reception tonight. I believe it is completely sold out at this point. But if somebody wants to go, come see me at the Reg desk, and I'll start a wait list if somebody wants to try to get in. Abstracts and speakers. I've asked all the moderators not to read abstracts or bios at this point. I've sent that out in the speaker compendium, so everybody has that, and I would encourage you to refer to it if you want more detailed information on the presentations that you are going to see. I would encourage everybody, part of doing these events is the advantages is the networking that goes on. So one of the things that I would encourage everybody to do is to join the LinkedIn group for the conference itself. It'll allow you to connect with people, find out more information about what's going on in the industry. We're fortunate, again, this year to offer CMEs. Thank you, Dr. Block, for being able to make the connection for us to go through Dade County Medical Association and FMA. So we've got 11.5 CMEs, accredited AMA credits this year. The fee for that is $100. If it requires all the docs that are going to be doing this to fill out an affidavit of attendance. And in addition to that, post-event, I'm going to send all the CME participants an evaluation form that Dade County requires in order for you to get your certificate. Dade County will actually submit the certifications to, I guess it's through FMA via, I believe it's CE brokers. So you won't have to do anything. It'll automatically be done for you this year. This is for everybody in the room. This is our moderator and speaker evaluation. So it's your chance to be a teacher and grade all the presenters that you're going to see. And I do need that feedback because we need to know, what presenters you like, what presenters we may want to bring back down the road. So please take the time. And I'll send this out post-event. Now, you don't have to do it now. I'll send it out post-event as well. Lastly, I need to thank our sponsors, because if it weren't for the sponsors, I can assure you this conference wouldn't be taking place. In fact, for any conference, if it weren't for sponsors. So our title sponsor is Trulieve. Our gold sponsors are Mary FAMU, the Florida Medical Cannabis Physicians Group. Thank you, Charles. Watson Strategies. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Our silver sponsors are Atlantic Processing, First Port Citibank, and ProMal Insurance. Our contributing partners, these are the groups that help us get the word out. Jody James, thank you very much, ma'am. I know all the amount of work that you do in the industry, and thank you very much for helping us promote the event. The event is being organized by CanEd. And I'm going to turn it right back into our program. So the first program, our opening panel, I think is going to be very, very interesting in light of what's going on. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric Stevens. Eric is with Floirda for Care, has a wealth of information and history in the industry, and he's going to drive the train. So with that, Mr. Stevens, it is all yours. Water.
All right. Thank you, Eugene, for gathering us all here together again. You know, we've got a very important year ahead. We've got a lot of things happening. And so I want to get right into it. I'm going to introduce our first speaker. We're going to have 3 different kind of full-on speaking, and then we're going to do a little panel and Q&A at the end. This gentleman has been up in Tallahassee since I've been going up there, and a long time before that, I believe. From the history and experiences that he's been able to show in the time up there. You know, he's currently the Director of Government Relations for Verano, moved by Verano, and also the head of Watson Strategies, where he works day in and day out with government and regulators and legislators on all these different topics. But he really has a unique history and looking at this and where we've started and where we've been and where we may be going here. So without further ado, to talk about the Florida Medical Cannabis Legislative Update, Mr. Ron Watson.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? It is such an honor to be before you all again this morning. It's hard to believe this is the 7th one that we've been doing. A little bit about myself. I moved to Tallahassee in 1985 as a 17-year-old freshman going to college. I was fortunate enough for my parents to get me a townhome, so I never lived on campus. And when I moved into that townhome, my very first person I ever met in Tallahassee's name is Gene Jones. So believe it or not, Gene was my neighbor when I was 17 years old up in Tallahassee. So here we are all these years later, and it was really his idea to try to put this thing together. And so I'm very appreciative for Gene and his wife Dana and Dennis and everybody else that's been working on this for so many years. So thank you for all that. All right, they've asked me to give a legislative update for, well, nope, not that one. Which one is it? That one. Okay, here we go. So a little bit about myself. They said I've been up here for a while. My God, it's been over 35 years. I should have a gold watch and I should be out in a field somewhere retired, but I keep getting up and doing this every day. So I got my start way back in the early 90s with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Back then we had all the medical and non-medical world. So I had 57 professions, and my goal was to eventually represent every one of them out now. So I'm trying. I then had 5 years representing DOs at the Osteopathic Medical Association, and then 5 with the Medical Association representing MDs. Then I spent over 10 years with the Florida Dental Association. So I was always an in-house lobbyist, basically had one set of issues to work on, and I was always kind of known for physician activities. Some things happened in my life. I did a crazy thing in 2014, and I started my own firm called Watson Strategies so I could talk about cannabis for children. Helped put the team together that became MOVE, and have had the pleasure of representing a whole lot of other healthcare entities in my many, many years. So some disclosures. I like to tell everybody, if you've talked to me, I've probably told you already, I'm a scumbag lobbyist. That's what I do for a living. Hopefully I get a laugh out of people. But then I try to explain to people what lobbyists are and how we really try to influence policy. I am a major Verano stockholder. One of my sayings is, no man's life, liberty, or property are safe when the legislature's in session. That was actually said in 1863. It's as more accurate today than I think it ever has been. So we're good right now. They're not in session, so you're safe. But I'm going to tell you about some of the things where you are almost not safe here in a little bit. Never make it personal, never take it personal. Your word is your bond. And one thing that I've learned, which is why I'm here, is take your pain and turn it into purpose. We all have reasons for being here, right? This is my reason. His name was Dylan Montgomery Watson. I lost an 8-year-old child to leukemia after a brave 14-month battle. And I'll be honest with you, I was smoking weed in the parking lot of Shands to deal with a dying child. Had I known what I know now, I would have taken all of that same cannabis into my child in Shands, and maybe we would have had some different outcomes. So in the highest honor of my life, there is a sign in all 75 of our locations around Florida that says, "Be awesome, cool, and funny," and that's actually dedicated to my son. So if you ever go to one of the moves, look for that sign in the front office as an honor to my son. Again, we all have our personal reasons for being here, and this one is mine. So what are we going to try to talk about today? I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure and the hierarchy of laws here, even though I'm not a lawyer, how we got to where we are now, what happened this last session, and then a little bit about 3 and some of the licenses. All right, so if you ever went to civics class, this is going to be a little reminder of that. The way that it works in Florida is we have the Constitution, which sits up over everything. As you well know, Amendment 2 changed the Constitution, so it became Article 10, Section 29. So we actually have in our Constitution the medical program right now. The legislature came in then to try to implement, and they created the section of law. It's 381.986. That is the section of law that actually governs everything that we do and that you all do and that patients are allowed to access. Then you have the Department of Health that sits underneath that, and they have their rulemaking authority. They can get even more specific with the rules that they make at the department, and they have emergency rulemaking authority, and they've had it for 7 years, which means every morning I wake up to see what the new rules for my particular industry may be, because they can literally publish a rule overnight and have it effective the next day. So it's been an interesting relationship with them over these many, many years. And there's been a couple of surprise mornings here and there for me. And then you have the local regulations, right? So what the legislature said is, okay, locals, you can ban us, but if you don't ban us, you're supposed to treat us like pharmacies. And we actually put that in 381.986. So that's just kind of a little bit of how the structure works. How we got to where we are. This is really, I'm going to try to go really quickly through here because I got a whole hour presentation on how we got to where we are. But this is really the 10 years of my life I've been spending at the Capitol. So back in 2014, the legislature actually passed the low THC bill. Some would say it was a little cynical because it was passed potentially because they had the amendment on the ballot that year. And so they did something. They passed a low THC law, and it would only apply to cancer, seizures, and muscle spasms. That first constitutional amendment failed. It failed 57.6%. That was a really hard morning for me that next morning. But we woke up the day after that and continued to move forward. In 2015, we were going to try to fix some stuff in the low THC bill, but it died, nothing passed. In 2016, lo and behold, we have another constitutional amendment on the ballot, and right to try passes. Right to try basically said that if you're dying, you should be able to take a drug that's not fully FDA approved because you're dying. And we said, well, hey, why shouldn't that apply to cannabis too? So we actually got cannabis included in the right to try bill. And again, they might have just been doing that to try to thwart the constitutional amendment. The good news was constitutional amendment passed, as we all know, the second go round. So then we come in 17 and try to implement this, and they kind of don't do it, to my great surprise. We come back in a special session where they had to pass a budget, and that's where the majority of the rules and laws that we have right now were originally adopted. It's Senate Bill 8A. And then you can see some emergency rules in 17. There was a black farmer bill in 18. And then in 19, we had a new governor. And as you all well know, we weren't allowed to smoke up until Governor DeSantis basically came in and said, you guys are going to change this or I'm going to drop the lawsuit. And believe it or not, that was the first bill Governor DeSantis ever signed. So the position going from that to where we are now is also very intriguing. And then we started, because they were forced to add smoking, that's when we started the great idea of a 10% THC cap, because we're going to discourage you from smoking by not letting you have any THC in the product. So thankfully, we killed that in 2019. The original hemp bill passed in 20, and then we also had a lot of the edibles and certified testing labs, emergency rules. We had a whole long year of putting those together. Again, back in 21 with a 10% THC cap, again, it died. And in 21, the Supreme Court also said that vertical and limited license are allowed. I thought that suit was going to go the other way because of the word "or" in the Constitution, but they basically said that our vertical and limited licenses are fine. In 22, we tried to pass what I called a good-bad bill, where we had some good stuff in it and some bad stuff in it, and we didn't really get very far. But that was fun to put that big bill together. And then in 22. There was some language, OMB rules, and so forth. 23, we got telehealth. after several years of trying, and then a couple of other bills that died. So then that kind of leads us up to where we are this year. Whoops. Oh, huh. That one's out of place. Okay, sorry, there we go. So these were the major issues that occurred in 2024. Honestly, there's only a couple of bills that passed that I'll get to you here in a minute. But the first big bill is, anybody ever heard of 280E? Believe it or not, MMTCs in Florida, we are not allowed to write off any ordinary business expenses. So believe it or not, I know a lot of people think we make a whole lot of money. We're paying anywhere from 65 to 70% tax bracket. Can you all imagine trying to run your business when you're paying a 65 to 70% tax bracket? It's all because we're Schedule 1. So what that bill would have done is basically allow us to be able to write off our business expenses in the state of Florida. It didn't move anywhere, but we did have it filed. There was another bill, was going to about locate retail shops. Right now, we have a 500-foot barrier from schools and a few other locations. That bill was going to basically try to extend that to 1,000 feet, and it was going to include daycares and several other facilities. They were also going to add bars and other things to that as well. That bill also died. There was another bill on edibles packaging that was going to change the rules about the packaging. I think Jody had something to do with that particular bill. That one didn't move very much either. Good news is it didn't pass, but for the first time I think ever maybe, we actually had the veteran ID card for free bill get a hearing, and it actually passed out of a House committee. So that was wonderful. It'd been the first time that we'd actually had any movement on that. It did not become law, unfortunately, but it did at least get a hearing, and it was a unanimous vote. Employee protection, if there's two things that I could fix overnight in this world, it would be workforce protection and it would be gun rights. There was a bill filed to try to say you can't be fired for utilizing this medicine, and of course it didn't move anywhere. There was a black farmer fix bill that was a standalone bill that never got heard. They actually did end up passing some black farmer language in the Department of Health bill last year, but it wasn't in the standalone bill. There was a bill that I called Bring It With You. You have reciprocity and so forth, and you're allowed to buy in other states. This bill would have basically allowed you to carry it across state lines, which I think would have been a problem. But nonetheless, they had a bill filed that would allow you to carry your product with you across state lines. Don't think it would have been legal, but nonetheless, there was another bill for lower penalties for possession. Unfortunately, it didn't move. And then there was another bill. This was the first time I think I'd seen this one, which I thought was a great idea. I guess within parental rights and sometimes in divorce cases, they've tried to bring up if one side has a medical card and the other side doesn't, that they're trying to use that against you in the parental rights argument. So that bill was going to say, no, you can't do that. The biggest bill from last year that we got most of the attention on was, yet again, the whole idea for a 10% THC cap came back once again. But believe it or not, it wasn't for medical this year, which was wonderful. It was going to be for the constitutional amendment that at the time that we were doing this hadn't even been approved by the Supreme Court. So they filed a bill that was going to try to be a preemptive, I suppose. And I will give Dr. Ralph Masulo a lot of credit. I'm going to go ahead and say this because he's term limited and so I can't get him in trouble. He called me and he said, Ron, and this is what he said, I've been told I'm filing this bill. And he was in senior leadership. So you don't get in senior leadership and have somebody to tell you to do something unless it's from the very, very top. So I will give Dr. Masulo a tremendous amount of credit. He called me on the phone and said he was told he's doing this. And the first thing out of his mouth was, Ron, I'm going to do everything I can to protect the medical program. He goes, my bill is not going to have anything to do with the medical program. And then he told me what was going to be in it. And I said, oh boy, we're going to have some talks, but thank you very much. So basically what the bill was going to try to do, again, we weren't even on the ballot yet, much less passed, was going to say that for adult use or recreational, you could only have 10% for flower and you could only have up to 60% for concentrates. And so, as you all well know, that would have been most of the flower not being allowed in Florida that most of the MMTCs are making now. So he was very receptive. I sat down and had many, many conversations with Ralph. And thankfully, we were able to move the bill from a 10% THC cap on flower to a 30% THC cap on flower, which was a huge victory for us. The other thing we were able to do is to actually have vapes exempted from the 60% concentrate level. And I explained to Ralph, I said, Ralph, look, if you do this, you're going to be forcing us to put cutting agents into these vapes. That is what harms people. So if you pass this law, you directly are going to be harming people. And I will give Dr. Masulo credit. He heard that one time. That's all he needed to hear. And at the next committee meeting, we actually amended that out. So we exempted vapes out of the 60% level, so then we could have continued doing vapes the way that we always had. But they did replace it with a 1 gram cart limit. Again, thankfully the bill died, but the House bill made it all the way to the floor. The Senate bill also made it out of I think it was one committee. And we got the Senate bill filed at 30% level, so that was a good thing too. I know there's been some concern, I didn't put it up here, but one of the things in the bill too is what I call the poison pill. There was some original language, and I think it was Senate Bill 8A, that said if any constitutional amendment basically passes in the future, that the existing program will be repealed in 6 months. So in that bill, we actually had fixed that too. We had taken that language out where it was going to repeal the repealer. And so at the end of the day, I actually thought that was a pretty good bill. I'm not sure we get this deal next year, if it's a deal we even need to work on. So that was really probably the biggest issue that we had this last year, and that's the bill number. So if you want to ever see it, you can click on the PDF down there. And I think you're sending the slides out, so these are all live. If you ever wanted to click on any of that, you can actually look at it. So, all right, I'm sure you've heard about this one too. This was a bill that I was following. I didn't work on. I didn't give my 2 cents, but if asked, I did talk about it. So I'm sure you all have heard, and there's some consternation going on right now whether the governor is going to sign this bill or not. But basically, they did pass a pretty strict hemp bill that, is the way I read it, would basically ban Delta 8 and Delta 10, and it would limit it to 5 milligrams per and 50 milligrams per package. And so there's also some language in there about the events and how you have to pre-register, and there's a whole lot of information in there that's now going to be required. They also put $2 million in the bill for FDLE to be able to have testing ability for this. Very controversial. In the House, there was actually a jump ball where they said, yeah, go ahead and do what you want. There was R's and D's on one side and R's and D's on another side, and that doesn't always happen in this process. So that was a very interesting bill. It has passed. Now, interestingly enough, they've not sent it to the governor yet. The way that it works is once a bill becomes passed by both chambers, they have to officially present it to the governor, and then the governor has 2 weeks before he or she can sign it. But if they don't present it to them, then the clock never stops ticking. The bill wouldn't be effective until October anyhow, so there's some belief that there's some theory that the governor may end up vetoing this bill. It's an interesting dilemma because it doesn't seem to make any sense that he would come out so strong against Amendment 3 and at the same time maybe veto this bill. But there's some political intrigue going on that suggests that if the hemp people vote no, and they're thankful that he vetoed the bill and that they give him some campaign contributions, that might be enough money to help defeat Amendment 3. So there's a lot of different kind of behind the scenes things going on. And the latest rumor is he's considering vetoing it pretty strongly. But again, he doesn't have it yet, so he can't physically do that. He doesn't have the budget yet either, so it's an art form as to when they release bills to the governor. But once he gets it, he only has 2 weeks to act. So we're still waiting to see what he does with hemp. That was the Department of Health bill. Every year, the Department of Health puts a bill together. Sometimes it has cannabis language in it, sometimes it doesn't. This one didn't as filed this last year, but darn if they didn't end up putting some language in there for black farmers and giving them another bite at the apple and having a 90 days to cure their application. So that bill passed as well. All right, that was kind of the majority. I tried to go really fast through all that because I know we got a lot of speakers that are smarter than I. So the 25 session begins on March 4th. We now have a staggered session. We used to always have sessions starting in March, but now we have one starting in March and one starting in January, so it's weird. Some years we have 8 months between session, some years we have 12 months between session. This is the 12 months between session kind of year. It's always in the election year. So after the election in November, they generally have what's called an organizational session. About 2 weeks later, they all come to Tallahassee, they get sworn in, they get told where their offices are, so forth. And then we'll start our committee meetings. Even though session doesn't start till March 4th, maybe 1 week in January, probably 1 week in December, 2 weeks in January, probably 3 weeks in February, we will have committee meetings where they will be hearing bills, they'll be voting on bills. So even though session doesn't start till March 4th, potentially if Amendment 3 passes, that we would start implementing our language maybe even as early as December or January, we would start working on it. So that's just kind of the time frame as to how we get to the next session. I'm going to let others talk about Amendment 3 in much more detail, but I just put one little slide up here. As you all well know, it made it on the ballot. Now, it requires 60% for it to pass. There's some concern that it doesn't include home grow, and I want everyone to very clearly understand it couldn't. We have single subject requirement here in Florida, and had you tried to put home grow in with this, the court would have tossed it for sure. So there are a lot of people who don't necessarily like this because it doesn't include home grow, and I tried to explain to them it couldn't. There was another constitutional amendment filed separately that was trying to also do home grow, and it didn't get a lot of support or a lot of money, and unfortunately it didn't get the signatures. So there was an effort to do that. I will also remind you that the legislature, if they chose to at any time, could authorize home grow, and I know that my company would be perfectly fine with that. So they'll talk a lot more about Amendment 3 in a few minutes here. Department of Health, I'm so glad that OMMU is here today. They got wonderful people over there and they spend their time with us. They're here to answer questions. So if you all have questions or concerns or you need some information, they're here, they're accessible. Please go talk to them. But if you haven't ever been there, that's the website, knowthefactsmmj.com. There's a tremendous amount of information there, but I know who I'm speaking to. You all know all about this. They put out a weekly report. So every week they literally put out a report, and it says right there all the different dispensaries, how many locations we have, how many milligrams of low THC and high THC that we've actually sold in that particular week. If you click on any one of those links, it'll actually take you right to that particular MMTC's website. How am I on time? And then I'm sure you've heard, we have 22 licenses now. I think it's 25 actually with the 3 Black Farmer Awards. But we're in the process of trying to dole out 22 more licenses. What the law says, in theory, is that for every 100,000 patients, you're supposed to get 4 more licenses. It's supposed to happen within 6 months, but of course that hasn't really happened. So they kind of stacked up and stacked up and stacked up. I think it was over a year ago now that I think they actually took the applications. So there's 22 that are available, and I believe there were 74 applicants, which I think is 73 now because one of them got a Black Farmer's license. So on the website, there's a list of all the applicants that applied as well. So literally, once this award comes out, we will double the amount of MMTCs in Florida that are presently here now. So we can do questions in a minute. And I just wanted to remind everyone that that was a saying, I guess I didn't share with you where the Awesome, Cool, and Funny came from. About 12 months into his 14-month journey, I showed up at Shan's one day and I walked in, and in his room on the wall where it said goals for the day, his goal for the day was to be awesome, to be cool, and to be funny. So every day of my life since then, that has been my goal. So I hope this weekend that you all have an awesome, cool, and funny time.
Thank you, Ron. We really do have a lot happening here over the next year. I'm going to let our next 2 speakers talk about Amendment 3, the Adult Use Cannabis Initiative in Florida. For that, we're going to have Lauren Niehaus, the Executive Director of Government Relations for Trulieve, joining us virtually, and Dr. William Troutt here, the Lead Medical Director, to explain more about that, and then we'll have one more presenter and then do some questions at the end. So, without further ado, get Lauren up here. And Lauren, can you hear us? I see your slide. Yeah. Can you guys turn her up a little bit in the back? But we can hear you, yes.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Lauren. Can you hear me? I don't know if she only gets one-way traffic there. I guess so. Lauren and I worked together. No, that's my echo, not her. Lauren and I have worked together for over 5 years in multiple states, bringing access to cannabis to patients and the community. And again, she's one of my heroes as far as getting qualified conditions added to different states. And bringing medical cannabis to our communities is something that is very, very important to me. In fact, it's been my main goal in my entire adult life. I'm a second-generation cannabis activist, and I think about these medical cannabis laws as community medicine. There's nothing healthier for our community than a thriving democracy, and this cannabis prohibition has been just a blight on our democracy. Millions of people have had their right to vote taken from them. Millions of people have been incarcerated in prison, felony convictions, can't get jobs, homes taken from families disrupted. The indigenous people around this world, the way that they've been impacted having their natural resource taken from them has just been absolutely devastating. My family was devastated by the prohibition of cannabis, and Ron, I don't talk about it much, but that's probably one of the biggest reasons that I'm here. And again, I have dedicated my activism to the medical side. And the doctors that are on the front line doing these certifications, one patient at a time, are definitely my heroes. I did certifications in Arizona for a couple years after our medical cannabis program passed in 2010. And our dispensaries were put on hold. The governor sued the federal government because they didn't want to participate in the program with the dispensaries. So I did certifications during that time frame. In fact, I became the medical director of a co-op that started in that time frame as well, up in Flagstaff, Arizona, that was, again, operated kind of like California. And they told us, obviously it was illegal. And, I many times thought that we were going to go to jail for what we were doing. But we had a great co-op where we had all kinds of services, massage therapists, acupuncturists that came in, counselors that came in. After 2 years, we were actually given the Service Agency of the Year award by the city of Flagstaff, which was very validating, knowing that we were doing good work there. Once the dispensaries opened up, I became a medical director for multiple dispensaries throughout Arizona and other states as well. And again, just very, very active in helping patients and communities get access to this medicine any way that I can. The adult use or programs have been characterized as recreational programs. In fact, that's the language in many states. And at first I had a problem with that language, recreational cannabis use. Many of the opponents of the programs were using it, trying to characterize, recreational use as just partying, associating it with alcohol use and bad decisions that are made under the influence of alcohol, which was, again, very troubling to me, because that is definitely not how people are using cannabis in these adult use states. In fact, polls suggest that most people are still using cannabis for medical purposes, even if they're buying it under the adult use program. They're suggesting they're using it for pain. They're suggesting they're using it for stress, anxiety, for sleep. So I see these adult use programs as expansions of these medical programs for conditions that may not qualify for these medical programs have been reserved for only the most severe medical conditions, and even many of those are not allowed on the ballot. Lauren and I have been fighting in Arizona to get autism, along with the parents and autism patient support groups, to try to get it on the ballot for the last several years, and we just have not been able to get it over that hurdle. So again, it's very important that we continue to push that bar forward. I would like to see, after these adult use programs pass, that we start working on expanding the medical qualifying conditions in these states as well. Getting sleep added to, as a qualifying condition, getting mild pain added as a qualifying condition as well. Florida is nice because it's one of the few states that allow doctors to write a certification for other conditions as well that are like the conditions that are qualifying conditions, but those as well are considered the most severe and chronic conditions that we're supposed to be writing those for. So a lot of people are definitely still left out of being able to use medical cannabis in these programs across the country. So very excited to, again, be a part of pushing this forward. I'm hoping that we see some rescheduling happening here soon. Obviously, that's not going to reconcile the adult use programs with the federal laws, and we've got a long way to go, but it is one step at a time. And I thank you all so much for all the work that you do in providing access to your patients and the communities. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for both of you for discussing a lot on that topic. We'll do some Q&A on that in a bit here. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce my next speaker, who will be speaking on the evolving cannabis space, from medical research and education to decriminalization and regulations. Dr. Jeffrey Block, the founder and president of Nurturing Nature, and he'll tell you a little bit more about his background and how he got involved in all this.
Okay. I've been tasked this morning to try to bring a complex subject to light, and I've been with Floirda involved with this for over a decade, and I will just start off by saying that it's a process. It's not a moment in time, and yet there was something very significant recently that's evolved through this, and that's that the federal government now is proposing a new disposition on prohibition. And that will be huge. But I like the way our previous speakers, especially those politically and legislatively attuned, have approached this in a chronological order. So I'm actually going to start from the same point in time in 2014 with the very first constitutional amendment here proposed for legalizing cannabis in some way, shape, or form here in Florida. And this was a political cartoon. It actually showed colleagues, I'm a member of the Florida Medical Association, but if you can tell from this cartoon, that duck doesn't look particularly compassionate nor knowledgeable. And so my theme through this brief presentation this morning is that science and reason, which is the purpose, the bioethics, all of the do the right thing, will be a repeating theme. And yet this year, this is the breaking news. It's just a matter of a few months ago. So this will be important, and I want to try to explain why that's so important. So without getting into too much clinical, that was covered nicely yesterday. Dr. Newton, Dr. Troutt gave you details about the endogenous endocannabinoid system, the molecules that are exactly in the plant itself, how they mimic and sort of use that receptor system. But I want to point out that real focused research is not really about the cannabis plant at all. The cannabis plant, in fact, is what has revealed this endogenous system, which is why it's named endocannabinoid system. And we don't have it because there's a plant there. The plant evolved perhaps as much as 60 million years ago, but the endogenous system, and don't think it's unique to you as a higher mammal or your patients, it's in all animals, even invertebrates going back 500 million years. So the problem is, how do you get a good biologic context from which to interpret the limited evidence-based data that currently exists? And I would maintain that it's maintaining pure focus on knowing what the endogenous system does. And the reason I put a little cannabis flower on the arrow is any archer or marksman knows the moment your focus changes from being purely on understanding the way the body works, you get distracted. And that archer, unless they're purely focused, is going to start to hit misses. This comes from a 2013, which will be the start of the talk, bringing you right up to 2024. The last 11 years have been quite formative. And this particular study from the National Institutes of Health was done by two MD, PhD researchers on top, Hal Packer and George Kunos. And this was a remarkable statement. When I read this, I said, really? Modulating the endocannabinoid system activity may have therapeutic potential in almost all diseases affecting humans. And I don't know about you, but I had never read anything that was as global and impactful perhaps as that is. And that's when I dove really deep into this. Right now, jump forward 11 years after that, and this is right now where it is in the United States. But it's a political process. And the same process that brought us into prohibition that took a little over a quarter century, with the supporting science being that California was the first state in 1996 to come out of federal prohibition as a state directive, it's been about that long, a few years longer right now. So my point is, it's not a moment in time, it's a process. And it seems to be that I'm advancing through slides faster than I wanted. That last slide I showed you, though, that looked like a little caricature of the United States, was meant to represent which states have which populations that are supporting the advance of this agenda. It's obviously reached a critical threshold, so now the federal government can't ignore it because it is a political process. A brief little comment about the plant itself. I am a physician botanist, and so when I look at plants, plant chemistry and things, I look at it perhaps a little differently. As an anesthesiologist, I'm a specialist in understanding pharmacology and physiology, in particular the ways that drugs affect receptors. So pharmacists, anesthesiologists need to know receptor-specific pharmacology, and in this case now, I want to sort of go to where my colleagues were in terms of the process. And I pointed out here that the Food and Drug Administration, in the top left, they're generally involved with issues of use and abuse. While the DEA, the other federal agency involved with this, the A's on both of those stand for administration, is involved with risks and benefits, but as it pertains to something being prohibited versus being a controlled substance, which is what the proposal is now for cannabis to be a Schedule III controlled substance. That's different. Schedule II is more tightly controlled. Schedule V is the least. And then you have things over the counter that aren't controlled at all. So a brief look at the definition that you physicians, and this is healthcare providers or just as law-abiding citizens, need to be aware of, is that prohibition definition says, and I've underlined three things: it has a high potential for abuse, no currently accepted medical use, which was something that was changed dramatically in 2017 with a federally commissioned report. And then finally, the real bugaboo one is this last one: lack of accepted safety under medical supervision. Well, if you're not allowed to really dole it out or have research that's unencumbered, that third one has been a very challenging thing. And it's not something that is unique to cannabis. There are other plant-derived chemicals that are the basis of our modern formulary that we all know and use as physicians. Opium, of course, the source of all opioids. As an anesthesiologist, we've used for decades fentanyl therapeutically, has a very short half-life. But that is not to say that the overdoses that are happening with lethal outcomes with all the drug use and abuse is not something to reckon with. Even cocaine is not a Schedule I prohibited substance. It's used in ear, nose, and throat surgery because cocaine as an anesthetic is also a vasoconstrictor, and it's used strategically there. As far as other plants that are just part of culture, well, what about this one? Tobacco. Okay, responsible for more preventable deaths globally than any other single substance, and it's plant-derived, of course. And finally, in my own yard where I'm at, I grow both chocolate and coffee. And if you don't think those have dependence-forming things, they do, okay? So what's a poor physician supposed to do? All right, this is a balancing act, and it's not balancing in the sense that somebody, is balancing their physiology or homeostasis. No fancy words today. I'm not going to show you a lot of chemical slides. I want to try to keep it simple because one of my, well, we just went somewhere there. One of my heroes in the space, Albert Einstein, famously said, if you can't explain it simply, you probably don't understand it well enough to begin with. And I'm honored at the University of Miami, where I'm an adjunct professor, to have given the oath of medicine, to tell docs to do the right thing. And I want to point out on top that Hippocrates is actually credited with having said nature itself is the best medicine. So where is education at now in the United States? I've become very familiar with this through our academic institution. And the key is that when someone graduates medical school with an MD or DO, and I'm pointing out that Florida regards a physician in this context who's able to work within the cannabis space as having to have one of those 2 degrees. One of my talented colleagues right here, Dr. Troutt, as a naturopathic physician, knows a hell of a lot about plants because it's not generally taught as much in allopathic schools about how the body interacts with its environment. That's what this is all about, because that's what endocannabinoids do. So my point is that once you're finished with medical school and you get a degree, you can't practice in any state in the country until you pass national board exams. And the emphasis on that is national board exams. And guess what's not mentioned in national board exams, because federally, nationally, it's regarded as having no known medical use. Anything about not just cannabis, but unfortunately even teaching about the endogenous system, how it works, why it's there. Other colleagues will be covering that tomorrow, as well as some yesterday, so I'm not going to get there, but I would like to talk just for a moment on doing something from a bioethical imperative. And the University of Miami is a medical school, is the oldest medical school in the state. It's the largest, and it also does the most research. And NIH Research Now is what's funding even the consortium that met yesterday and the day before, which by law is a collection of different institutions participating in research to come up with what they regard as being salient. I was confronted at my own institution back in 2013 about how am I going to approach this? Should we provide, or I provide, compassionate access to cannabis while it remains under federal prohibition? So I looked at the American Medical Association, and they do have a medical legal ethics disposition on it that basically says a physician shall respect the law and also recognize a responsibility to seek changes in those requirements that are contrary to the best interests of the patient. That sounds noble. The fact is, though, it's nearly impossible when you and myself as a practitioner don't have just a state license. I have 2 licenses. I have a DEA license. It's my privilege and honor to be able to prescribe drugs. And that's where they're in conflict, which is why a change in the federal disposition on prohibition is so important for physician acceptance. Then and only then will education be in the medical schools and the physicians coming out in the next generation. And it could take a full 10 years with 4 years of medical school, internship, residency. By the time you get out and practice, for any of you practitioners here, watch out. The kids coming out of school by a decade from now will smoke you unless you get up on this stuff. So, medical legal ethics has not worked. It is not simply a conversation between doctors and lawyers. So there's another field in ethics that's called bioethics. I don't know if you've heard of this, but this is largely an area of ethics. And by the way, the University of Miami School of Medicine has the longest standing department of ethics of any medical school in the United States. And I've talked deeply with our department there. It was the very first grand rounds on this subject I gave back in early 2017. Bioethics then involves discussions with the full community, not just doctors and lawyers, but with teachers, educators, law enforcement, clergy. The idea is you bring the full conversation to light, and that's exactly what allowed things as momentous as stem cell research, which if you remember back to George Bush 1, will allow it, but we're only going to allow this particular little limited subset of things to work from. we weren't trying to create a Frankenstein. This was all part of the process of learning that through bioethics, I had to come up with what I want to share with you, which I believe is a sound way to approach this, to know you're doing the right thing. And so a statement then that could be said from a bioethical rationale from the perspective of a patient, and we see this, seeking relief from the intolerable physical, psychological, or spiritual symptoms or of injuries and diseases, it's instinctive. Animals will self-soothe. And it contributes to medical substances use and abuse. So from a physician's perspective then, if that was going to be my disposition on how this is looked at, would be that the treatment of intolerable symptoms is a noble task and that society bestows it upon its healers to provide humane relief. So where does that put us today in terms of understanding not just simply the rights of the individual? This conversation's not about decriminalization or compensation and things like that. It's where to go from here. And how do we make the most impact on the most people? Well, one good way would be, sorry about this, some of these are just not progressing as I would like. So you get to see that slide twice. This is a slide. This is a slide, though, that I want to focus on for just a minute. These are the leading causes of preventable death. And this is actually globally. But if you look in the bottom right, this is from March 2004. And you see tobacco is by far the leading cause. I mentioned that when I showed you the tobacco plant on an earlier slide. Look way out to the right. Drug abuse was the 9th. That's changed. And this is a very important distinction about the change. Right now, tobacco smoking is going down. That's a public health victory, especially in the United States. And it's not that way all across the world, but we've made tremendous inroads for health statistically by impacting the most people by addressing smoking and tobacco. At the same time, however, lethal opioid overdoses have pushed drug abuse from where it was as 9th, and this, by the way, was just a few years ago in 2019, just past motor vehicle collisions. Since then, you're hearing more and more about fentanyl deaths, of course, so now it's likely advanced beyond toxins, infectious diseases with recent COVID experiences, probably keeps now that drug abuse concern. It's climbing, it's not diminishing, and that in of itself has probably led to a hesitation with advancing anything concerning cannabis for fears that we may be just getting worse. So are those fears real? Well, not decided quite yet, because we have a burgeoning industry right now. Most of my colleagues are part of that industry, and yet we don't really know truly what the benefits versus costs to public health will be. So what I want to point out now is that us docs were sort of stuck in the middle. And you know the thing about the cart getting ahead of the horse? Well, in this case then, the doc that you would think would be leading the science and reason, it's a little bit backwards because the evidence-based data is in fact not necessarily what's driving the show. So I want to point out again with the same theme of that science and reason matter to this quote from 2017, without some common baseline of facts, without a willingness to admit new information and concede that your opponent's making a fair point, and that science and reason matter, we'll keep talking past each other and making common ground and compromise impossible. Well, the science and reason really dramatically shifted. In 1999, the Institute of Medicine, that used to be called, published Marijuana and Medicine barely 5 years after California, or less than that, barely 8 years after the discovery of endogenous receptors, the ligands that we have. And then yet in 2017, early 2017, they federally commissioned, and this was a meta-analysis, huge study, and this was done by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, was published, and that was key, because that's where the research and the basis for this started. So don't listen to me. I'd like to show a few little slides from the nation's top doc, the Surgeon General of the United States. And this first little video clip was an interview done, I believe, back in 2016. Vitek Murthy, right here.
Mr. Surgeon General, while we have you here, I want to get you on the record about whether you support the legalization of marijuana and what concerns do you have?
Well, marijuana is an interesting story that's unfolding in our country right now. And we have, had a long history of discussion around the benefits and risks of marijuana. We have experiments that are going on in many states right now where medical marijuana has been legalized, and in at least a few states where it has been legalized even for recreational use.
We know all of that. We want to know your position, Mr. Surgeon General, with all due respect.
Yes, well, my position is that we have to see what the science tells us about the efficacy of marijuana. And I think we're going to get a lot more data on that. We have some preliminary data showing that for certain medical conditions and symptoms that marijuana can be helpful. So I think that we have to use that data to drive policymaking, and I'm very interested to see where that data takes us.
Dr. Vivek Murthy, we thank you doing your first live interview with us here on CBS. Good to see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.
So he looks kind of young. I'll tell you something interesting about Dr. Murthy. He's actually the first two-time Surgeon General. He's the current Surgeon General. Surgeon Generals are political appointees. Don't let that escape you for a moment. But here are the Surgeon Generals since 1970 when this Controlled Substance Act started. And if you look, they have a little number that's color-coded there. Those in green were Surgeon Generals on the record for having said they are in favor of advancing cannabis knowledge and availability. And so pro-con, not nearly pro or con, those bring us all the way up to Dr. Jerome Adams, the 10th one there. And it says not really pro or con, but in fact, Dr. Adams was able to give a disposition I'll show you in a few minutes. His concern, probably as an anesthesiologist, was on dosing. He says, dose and concentrates really do matter, so he wasn't going to put his neck out several years ago. Right now, then, this is where cannabis regulation in the landscape was in 2017. I've approached this whole talk this morning chronologically, so this follows after what you just saw Dr. Murthy's comments. And as you can see, the United States is in a process, but so is the rest of the world, waiting for what we do next. And then, of course, came the study that I pointed out before, and I'm not going to go too deep into this other than to show you here that this is what that showed. And it doesn't cover every existing qualifying condition in Florida nor most of the other states, but it does show that there is efficacy that is either with substantial or conclusive evidence-based data that it exists for these things. So what does that bring about in terms of what's happening, what recommendations were made in 2017 going forward? These were 4 key recommendations: develop a comprehensive evidence base for the short and the long-term use, development of conclusive evidence on the short and long-term health effects, to ensure that sufficient data is available, and finally, to create a committee of experts tasked to produce an objective and evidence-based report. These are all really fine recommendations. 2017 is already 7 years ago, but hopefully that's what you'll see derived from this. So, in fact, I mentioned Dr. Adams, the former top doc, the former Surgeon General of the United States, and here's what he had to say about it just a few years ago.
Very concerned as Surgeon General at how far and how fast we're going on marijuana in this country. Very concerned. Number one, this isn't your mother's marijuana. Marijuana a decade ago was 5% THC, single digits THC. You now have professionally grown strains that are 20, 30% THC, and then they're concentrating them into oils, into waxes, they're vaping them, they're dabbing them, they're shatter, and you're getting 90, 95% THC. It's like the difference between you having a glass of wine and a pint of grain alcohol. It literally is. And so we've normalized this idea of marijuana use across the country way too fast, to the point that in communities in California, there's 1 in 5 pregnant women, 20% of pregnant women reporting that they are using marijuana during pregnancy. Youth attitudes are changing about marijuana across the country. And I want you to hear me say this as the nation's doctor. There is no such thing as medical marijuana. And I see some eyebrows raised out there. We don't talk about medical foxglove. We don't talk about medical opium. There is no other substance out there that as a physician, we say grow it in your backyard, crumble it up, bake it into a brownie, or roll it into a cigarette and smoke it, and that's going to be good for whatever ails you. There are over 100 components of marijuana, some of them which have medicinal properties and medicinal promise, and we need to make sure we push for the research so that we can say to each individual, this component has been proven to be beneficial for your disease, and here are the risks and the benefits.
Okay, so that's 5 years ago. I'm going to show you next Dr. Murthy, the previous Surgeon General, who is the current Surgeon General, and his disposition today, 5 years later. It's different. And he looks different too. You're going to see he's a lot more gray after that. And I'll point this one thing out. I just celebrated, went there with my wife, my 50th high school reunion. It's a little high school in Miami, a public school. Dr. Murthy was former of a valedictorian there. And as just a little aside, another valedictorian from my little high school was Jeff Bezos. So here's Dr. Murthy and his disposition now.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer introduced legislation this week to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level. From a health perspective, do you support that?
Well, when it comes to marijuana, Dan, I think we have to let science guide us. And we know that the science tells us that there are some benefits for marijuana from a medical perspective, but there are also some harms that we have to consider, and we have to put those together as we think about the right policy. Now, when it comes to decriminalization, I don't think that there is value to individuals or to society to lock people up for marijuana use. I don't think that serves anybody well. But I do think that in terms of our approach to marijuana, I worry when we don't let science guide our process and policy making. And in a Surgeon General, that's my role, is to work with policymakers, to work with members in the community and the general public to help people understand what science tells us and where you have gaps, to help fill those gaps with research and with honest inquiry.
Dr. Vivek Murthy, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciate it.
So that's 5 years ago. Oh, no, just 3 years ago. The point is, at this point, the Federal Health and Human Services part of our federal government was tasked with coming up with a current disposition with the evidence-based data about should cannabis still be prohibited, and a different disposition came out from this point forward that brings us actually up to, oh boy, I don't know why this
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Brings us right up to today. So what's special about this? Here we are in Florida. I'm at the University of Miami, but the University of Florida is where the consortium that's had meetings yesterday and the day before is doing most of the research. There's been a lot accomplished since then. Even I myself have been published in 3 legitimate medical textbooks since December of 2020 concerning pain, the supporting chemistry and biology of cannabis, and just about 2 weeks ago, Brody's Human Pharmacology's 7th edition came out. There's 2 chapters in there, and I'm the lead author on one concerning cannabinoid medicine, but also, to try to be fair and balanced, another chapter in that key pharmaceutical student textbook about drugs of use and abuse and substance abuse disorder. If you're not prepared to have the full conversation, you're not really in education. Thank you. So, I'm going to conclude now, right on time, with a little bit of a parable. And I don't know if you can see and hear the mysterious sort of form there and the smoke coming out of this joint, but there has been a repeating message here. And it's that I told you when we started that science and reason matter. Well, if you look at this little smoke here and you consider that a temptation's indulgence, it offers us choices. Right now, historically, in time, it has historically, but that little smoke can be sort of akin to the genie in the bottle. And you know what a genie does? You know that genie gives you those first 2 wishes to sort of suck you in, and then the third one's the gotcha? Well, that's where you got to be careful, and that's why I've put that caution in there to be careful what we wish for. And the fact is, it's because science and reason really do matter. So there's limited time for us to speak today. If any of you do want to contact me further, that's how I can be reached, and so thank you for your time.
That was amazing, Dr. Bach. I appreciate the insight, especially with all of your background in medical history, botanical history as well. So we're going to get into the Q&A portion. I don't know if we can get Lauren brought back up here as far from an audio perspective. I'll also briefly introduce our other panelists that are up here. In addition to myself, I'm Eric Stevens. I worked on the medical marijuana amendment in 14 and 16 and getting that passed, and its continual implementation that Ron so nicely went through as it's kind of changed and evolved over the years via lawsuits, litigation, and the legislative process. Then we have Ms. Jody James, the Executive Director of the Florida Cannabis Action Network, has been going up to Tallahassee for even longer on this issue. Has been going up to Tallahassee even longer on this issue, and continuing to push legislators far before they were willing to have conversations at all on this to where we are today. And then we have Aaron Bloom, Esquire. He's the CEO of DocMJ, one of the leading physician clinics here in the state. So, I'll kind of just pose the question to everybody. What do you think is the most important thing in your focus over the next year, whether it's in general, legislatively, et cetera? And we can kind of maybe start down the end and come this way, and we'll see what other audience questions we have. We have a microphone that will be going around here too. So.
I think, hello. Nope.
We get these mics on?
Number 3 for anybody who cares.
3.
Hello.
Number 3.
Hello. I could probably project. I don't know.
Here, 2-5. There we go. Use that one.
So I guess if the question is what's the one priority, assuming that Amendment 3 passes, for me it is simply that our patients have access to the products that they need and have come accustomed to using and have found relieve their suffering. And I think Trulieve, and Lauren mentioned it during her presentation, Trulieve's commitment to continuing to serve the medical market. And so I think that's the most important thing that I'm striving for and looking for, is making sure whatever happens, the patients there's over 880,000 medical patients, that they have access to the safe products they've come to rely upon.
Florida Cannabis Action Network is a 25-year-old statewide organization. Many of the people in this room are our members. To say that protecting the medical program isn't a #1 priority for Florida Cannabis Action Network would be ridiculous. But we also want to make sure that the new people who are going to be coming into this market, whether they're using cannabis over the counter, whether they're working with a qualified physician, or they're finding something on the legacy market, we want to make sure that the products that they get are pure, precise, and predictable, and that at the end of the day they understand how to use these products safely and responsibly to try and reduce some of the problems. One of the things that we continue to battle against is ignorance and the misidentification of information. We're going to hear later about poison control. If people knew more about the product, they wouldn't call 911 so often. If we understood that it's only been in the last couple years that they even started looking at this data and adding this data, then the public wouldn't be quite so freaked out. So at the end of the day, we believe that this plant, without adulterants, is safe, and we want to see safe products rolled out.
You've heard enough from me. I'll be very brief. I would just answer that question by saying education, education, education is what I'll be working on for the next year. One of the things I do for MOVE is I guess it was last week, I interviewed legislative candidates running for the House and Senate down in Tampa. I'm part of a professional lobbyist group, and every half an hour they brought in a new legislator, either an incumbent or somebody running for office. I got to ask them the weed question, so I'm the real fun guy in the room. So I would ask them about Amendment 3, I would ask them about medical, and I got a lot of negative opinions. They were just kind of parroting some of the lines that they'd heard from above. And I took the opportunity to say, well, whether you like it or not, the people that are going to be voting for you most likely do. So I was encouraging the individuals to maybe keep a little bit more quiet that are really opposed, and really trying to identify the individuals. But part of the education, like they said, is I'm all about protecting the medical program. I want a person who absolutely needs this, because you've said they need this, to actually have front of the line access, that anybody that's doing it for adult use or recreational use, however you want to call it, should have access, but they should have access after the sickest of the sick have access. So it's all about education, education, education for me. Next week I'm going to Miami and Fort Lauderdale. We'll be interviewing candidates down there. So it's all about talking to your local people, getting to know your representatives, and letting them know how you feel. They get sick and tired of hearing from me and Jody and others up here. They need to hear from people down in their district that actually vote.
Right.
I'm sorry, say again? That's a great question. I know Jody in the past has they have what they call a scorecard, and they've gone through and actually scored legislators' votes. And so I know Jody has done that. I'll be honest with you, I do it internally from my group. I have not necessarily shared my results with others, but I put together a list of who I think we should support and who I think we maybe should stay away from, and it has a lot to do with that information that I've gathered.
So when you say that you got negatives back and they were parroting whatever they were parroting from above, are you referring to legal adult use specifically, or are you saying that's percolating over into medical as well?
That's a great question. I was meaning to say for adult use, but I will tell you, if you are an existing lawmaker now, you have some experience with medical, and I think you have a little bit more knowledge. There were a lot of some of the original people running for the very first time that don't understand the distinction between adult use and recreational, and so they were speaking to it as if it was the same thing. And that was an opportunity to educate as well. So I meant to say that I'm asking the Amendment 3 question now, and then following it up with, well, based on what they say, well, how do you believe about medical? Do you have anyone in your family that's benefited from this, and yada, yada, yada. And unfortunately, from the Republican side, I have heard a lot of people that are just kind of parroting what they've heard from above. And it is my opportunity. You know, one of my favorite things to do is whenever I get somebody like this, my goal is to walk away and get them going like this. Because if I can get somebody from hell no to then I've done my job.
No, can we finish just going down the line here, and then we'll start the audience Q&A? Appreciate it.
So focus for the next year. And yeah, it's patience, and education is absolutely the key. I'm glad there are lobbyists like Ron and Lauren that are working to get the laws changed on the legislative side so I can focus on patience. And my focus is about bringing it to the mainstream, the people that don't know about cannabis. I mean, many of these medical programs and the adult use programs are serving people that were already using cannabis. And I think where we really have the opportunity to grow these medical programs and really change community health is by getting the word out to people that still have those stereotypes in their mind about cannabis and aren't open to cannabis use, the physicians that still aren't open to talking to their patients about cannabis use. So I try really hard to not speak to the choir. I don't show up at the big, other than the medical cannabis conferences, the cannabis powwows. It's about getting in front of those people that we need to change those hearts and minds, right? And that's where we're gonna make the biggest difference. Seniors and senior groups are my favorite. Polypharmacy issues, the differences that we can make on that end is so significant. So that's where I focus my attention, is getting my foot into those doors that have been closed for so long.
If you could tell from the talk I gave, I'm very focused now on the change pending on federal prohibition. And in terms of things that Ron just covered and Dr. Troutt here, whether it's education or the legislative process, I know Ron pointed out how our Department of Health with rulemaking even has emergency rulemaking authority. Well, I've been doing this for 10 years, and 10 years ago, the very first education was mandated. It was an 8-hour CME with Florida's very first law. Yes, it was CBD only, and I'll let you know, I was the only Florida physician who was contributing and wrote that education course. The following year, I was also the only Florida physician to write Florida's Rules of Law, a committee of 9 experts. And so you had a grower and a processor, but they thought one physician on a medical law made sense, so that was myself as well. It's a process. Even the process of rulemaking with that committee took several days. And then it gets sent back to the people and you get the feedback, but overall it's a process. I'm very interested and I want to watch closely what happens with the process coming out of federal prohibition, which will involve rulemaking at the federal level. Because now you're talking about rules of not of Florida's Constitution, but of the Controlled Substances Act. And since 1970, you need to know, the Controlled Substances Act was written for, by, and through Big Pharma. And what does that mean? Almost all the drugs that are controlled or prohibited are ones where they're being looked at from the basis of Big Pharma, which would say one drug, one molecule, which cannabis is not, and one patent. So the conversation will evolve in rulemaking at a federal level, but guess who's going to be at the table now? Big Pharma. And that's going to be very different. And the opportunities for research and academic institutions continuing the education is going to skyrocket. But that's going to be a process, and it's not going to happen before the elections in November. It could take years. And so my point here is that these are all good steps. You may think of them as baby steps, or why should it still be a controlled substance, free the weed? No, this is a stepwise process based on evidence-based data. You're not going to get around that basic fact from the federal government. But once that's done, my 2 licenses, my state license, wherever I practice, or my federal, are no longer going to conflict. And that's key.
It's an open comment period right now at the federal level where they're actually trying to go from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. They've made the suggestion, and what they're doing is they've opened it up for public comment. So I think it's a 60 or 90-day period.
We still have about 45 days
Is it
left.
45 days? So I would encourage every practitioner out there right now, this is your opportunity if you really wanted to express, give specific condition, you know, I mean, you know, without telling your patients, I mean, give examples. Write to them and tell them what your practice has done for the people. Let them know how this plant really is medicine. This is our opportunity to give that input.
Florida Cannabis Action Network is actually going to be putting together some workshops available on Zoom over the coming weeks so that we can put together a comprehensive statement from the organization and our members. So if people are interested in that, just make sure you get on our email list. We love to have people participate.
Quick question. My name's Dr. Polito. I'm from Jacksonville, Florida. I really appreciate you guys putting this together. Extremely important discussions that we're having, and very fruitful time for me. My worry and my question, the main reason why I came here with my staff was historically in other states when they go adult or recreational, it usually doesn't go very well for their medical side. And everyone on the board has vowed to do whatever they can for the medical side, but I really didn't hear much like facts. It's like I'm yet to have someone explain to me what's going to be the difference between, you know, adult use and the medical side. And there's some weird things that I don't understand, like they say 3 grams. How long is that 3 grams for? Because right now we give them 2.5 on the medical side. How long is it 3 grams for? Oh, sorry, ounces, I apologize. You know, I have questions like that. I mean, you guys said, well, we can probably put an express lane for the medical people, and those are all very good things. But I'm curious, what's going to be the difference between the 2 programs, and will there be any type of difference?
Great question.
Well, I think the first thing that we're going to continue is to protect the tax-free status. When we first started implementing medical marijuana in the state of Florida, it was Florida Cannabis Action Network and the AARP who says we don't tax marijuana. Lawmakers wanted to tax medicine, and we drew a hard, fast line. We don't tax medicine in the state of Florida. The other thing that I think is going to protect the medical program, one of the things that we're going to be working on, is the ability for patients to have community gardens or home cultivation, and that'll be something for patients. We're very concerned about pesticides. We're very concerned about growth hormones. We're very, very concerned about those things. So for us, protecting your tax-free status for patients. And if Dr. Troutt is right, once we move to Schedule 3, then we actually have more people that are going to be coming to you guys as specialists. You guys are the experts in this, and people with complex medical conditions, an organization like mine, and we do support adult recreational use, non-medical use, but patients with complex conditions need to be working closely with physicians who understand this and the other disease sets. You guys are irreplaceable in this process.
Do we have Lauren on too? I don't know if she wants to address this.
Just on that one real quick, because this is an
Ron.
important question, and I really want to address this. Thank you so much for asking it. It's premature. When I say there's going to be an implementing bill, remember when I said you have the Constitution and then you have the laws and then you have the rules. The Constitution can only be so specific, and that's where it has the 3 ounces and the 5 grams, right? So then it's going to be the legislature's job to actually implement that. But we know this is a legislature that doesn't want to do it. So I can tell you there's going to be hurdles. I cannot tell you exactly what those hurdles are going to be yet, but I've been doing this for a long time, and I know this legislature, and they, if forced to do this, are going to put hurdles up. Here's an example. My best friend from high school lives in Jersey. They went rec. I called him. He had a medical card. Are you going to keep your card? He said yes. And I said, why? Taxes? And he said, no, it's only 6 or 7%. I said, why are you going to keep your card? He said, in Jersey, there was 2 reasons. It surprised me. He said one was front of the line. So the idea of like a fast pass at Disney where you can skip ahead of everybody and you go on the ride, that could be, that's the way it is in Jersey. So if there's 100 people in line, he gets to go to the front of the line and get his medicine, which again is a great way to protect the medical program. That makes sense. The other reason he specifically said is in Jersey, they allow home delivery only for medical. They don't allow it for adult use. And I was surprised that those 2 reasons alone, he told me he's going to keep his medical card. So I can't tell you exactly what hurdles they're going to put up yet, but I can guarantee you there's going to be enough hurdles that in my humble opinion, that the medical program is still going to be attractive enough where the 1 million+ people by the time if we do this, are not all going to drop overnight. There's going to be benefits and there's going to be reasons to keep your card. I just can't exactly tell you what they are yet.
Yeah, and another thing that we don't know exactly what the legislation will look like as far as if there's caps on what type of products are available for adult use. One thing we saw happen in Arizona is that you are not allowed to package any products that have more than 100 milligrams in them. So that was a big issue with tinctures because again, in the adult use market, they can't purchase tinctures that have more than 100 milligrams in it of THC or, again, combination of that with CBD products as well. So I know that was a big issue for people keeping their cards. I had just talked to somebody a couple days ago that was talking about a CBG product that they wanted. It was 20 milligrams CBG and 20 milligrams of THC, but they couldn't buy that product under the adult use program either. So I think the availability of products is going to be another incentive or reason why patients continue to keep their card. But the big thing about the medical programs versus adult use programs is why we have to keep people in these medical programs is this cannabis medicine is not a one-size-fits-all medicine. And those new patients that we're trying to bring into the program that don't understand cannabis, having that education about the right type of dosing, the right type of products, actual management from their physician is imperative to them getting good results out of it. So I think that's on us to really have those conversations and those education, that type of education in the community to make sure patients understand its medical value and continue that relationship with their physician.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys covered that pretty well. Lauren, are you here? Do you want to weigh in on any of that? I mean, I think Ron and Dr. Troutt covered it, but I know AFI was trying to switch over so we wouldn't have any feedback. Try now, Lauren. All right, he's still working it. He's still working on switching it, so.
I want to jump in on the...
Are you here, Lauren?
Yeah, it goes here.
No. Lauren?
We're getting the next question.
Next question.
It's right here.
Maybe? No? We'll come back. All right.
I do want to piggyback on this discussion, and I'd probably be a little bit uncomfortable. But as practitioners, we're talking about education and bringing about the process of probably implementing laws and how we can best bring it to our probably people that are in position to change law. So this is where it gets uncomfortable, and my respect to all of us that do respect the law. But how can we be taken seriously when it starts with us? When we're talking about education, our patients, when they come to our office, they're begging for education because 5 physicians ago, they were in their boats issuing these licenses, or their secretary issuing these licenses, and there's no guidance. And it gets so expensive that they're charging them $300 an average for a license. But if they want gummies, now they're charging them another $50. If they want something else, they charge. So how can we advocate for education when among our peers we're not even advocating that? And how do we change that? We go out and we're out there. I'm out there, and I advocate for education. And we have been voted #1 repeatedly, again and again in this area for education. And we advocate for other physicians to join us. And it's not a competition, but the majority of physicians make it seem like we're in competition for each other. We shouldn't be in competition to sell a medical license. And how do we solve that? One voice can't. And how do we join your panel to change this conversation?
So I'll let the panel weigh in on this. I mean, I would say, get involved with me and Charles and the physician talks. We usually have bi-weekly, once a month, to talk about these things, talk about education opportunities, talk about, where we could go to continue that process. I think we need to have more, maybe from the tax revenues and other things, we can then get more of that. But even with FAMU, I mean, talk to them over there. They do some education processes via the state. What do you all?
So
I think Lauren's possibly.
It starts with us. That's the way up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Yes, we can.
Just that question, I wanted to weigh in on kind of what Ron and Jody had mentioned. We don't know what we don't know yet in terms of what this legislature is going to do. And I've said this before, and I wholeheartedly believe it, that the adult use program is going to have restrictions in Florida. We saw where we voted before, and patients who need access to higher potency products, to more specific products, to hybrid products, there will be additional
Lauren, we can see you now. That was great. Yeah, we got to see a view of you. So I've got a question for you, Lauren, and Ron, our lobbyists. So if it does get rescheduled to a Schedule 3, then that does have some legal implications, I would think, for medical patients. The adult use programs are still going to be illegal on a federal level, or people using it for adult use will still be illegal on a federal level. Will there be protections for patients at that point when it is rescheduled to a 3? So work protections, professional board protections, those types of things. And if that won't be there, can we work on getting those in place in Florida? Like in Arizona, we have those types of protections in our law. We've got medical board protections in our law for medical patients. We've got, again, work protections as well. So is definitely a distinction and reason for people to keep their card. And I wondered, again, will the rescheduling to a Schedule 3 provide those types of protections in the medical program versus the adult use program?
Lauren, you're so much smarter.
Yeah, can y'all hear me? So, again, our favorite phrase, we don't know yet, Dr. Troutt. However, what we absolutely anticipate is there's a couple of points here. If we're a Schedule 3, which we believe we will be, we will expect guidance. So if everybody remembers years back, the DOJ came out with the full memo, basically said, we're not going to prosecute you, state legal operators. I think that we're going to see a re-upping of that guidance from the DOJ. We'll see guidance from the TTV. We'll see every 3-letter agency in the federal government will have an opportunity to provide us guidance. I think it's going to take some time. But I think that then for like Ron's work at the state level, it is a very different discussion to say, hey, we're the same category of Tylenol with codeine. So let's take a look at some of these restrictive laws that we have in place, some regulations that we have in place, because now we're in a completely different category. We are no longer drug traffickers. We've moved up on the CSA, so state officials should have a little bit more comfort in how you treat your medical programs as a citizen.
I couldn't have said it any better. I agree.
All right.
You?
A couple of questions. One, if it does go Schedule 3, do we have to have a DEA license to make recommendations, and are recommendations now becoming prescriptions? And the second question is if it goes rec, do you think that's going to alter the frequency of how many times a year the patients have to visit the doctor for medical?
At least for the first part of your question there about if it should become legal, then what happens to authorizing physicians suddenly become prescribing physicians. And by the way, if you ever really want to potentially get in trouble, don't regard it as a recommendation, but write your recommendation on a prescription pad, and that could get the attention of the feds. So as this evolves, what you're bringing up is a salient point, because for all controlled substances, then it becomes a prescription. And by the way, that word prescription actually comes from a French derivative word which means to order. And as far as I know, with any state, Florida went as far as any other state did because it mentions the word order in the law. So a lot of this may seem like semantics, which it is, but nevertheless, because it impacts your license to be able to do it or not just do you have a DEA license, but if you don't right now and then it becomes controlled, you have to get one. Or people have let theirs slip when they went into this field and they said, hey, I don't need it here, it's prohibited anyway, and I'm doing it only within the confines of the state I'm practicing. It's going to be a very interesting, maybe tug of war for a while between the feds and each of the states, but at least it will become a national standard, and it will free up education and research. I'll tell you, it's not just the interstate banking that gets changed when you move out of prohibition, not the Schedule 2. Schedule 2 has great constraints to research and to interstate commerce and banking. Schedule 3 is far less cumbersome, 4 and 5 even less than that. So people here may not think Schedule 3 is far enough. It's a stepwise, as I said before, process. So good question as far as the process goes. I think you'll see feedback from the individual states. But remember this through this 30 or 50-year process, is that the states are, by intention and design, individual experiments that when there's a consensus of enough citizens, enough states, then it gets to be considered as a federal law. And it went into prohibition the same way from about 1910 to 1937, which is really not the Controlled Substances Act, but the first real legality. It's about a quarter century, and it took time as that process went in. It's going to take time as it comes out, including in the rulemaking, which is likely to impact exactly what you're bringing up.
And I'll just add to the rabbit hole of that question, because I don't know what the answer is, but can you prescribe a Schedule 3 substance that doesn't exist as far as being licensed to be manufactured by the FDA?
It's a step in the right direction, but I don't think it's the final step. And so it helps solve certain problems by going to Schedule 3, but in my humble non-lawyer opinion, I think it creates other ones, and that's the exact thing. You're used to writing a prescription, right? Oh, let me go back. Florida, the way we set up Florida, it's as close to a prescription as you can probably get anywhere in the country. So when we go to Schedule 3, the system we already have in place is very similar to a prescription anyhow. It basically was a prescription without it being called a prescription because we had a lot of pushback at that at the very beginning. So it's an intriguing question. This is all, we're on the ground floor here, right, guys? It's been 10 years. We're still trying to figure this out as it progresses and moves forward, and you guys are at the front line. I have a feeling, just as kind of we ignore some of the Schedule 1 stuff, if we go to Schedule 3, I have a feeling we'll kind of be ignoring some of the Schedule 3 requirements, but that's yet to be determined, and each state, like you said, is going to probably play that out a little bit differently.
And I think the other part of your question, I can answer it briefly. The 7 months, 210 days is contained in the legislation, and we talked about that at the beginning. For the medical program, that will not be impacted directly by Amendment 3. Whether there's a tidal wave of change as a result of if Amendment 3 passes, maybe, but there's no direct impact on the 210-day restriction at this point.
Question over here.
So I want to go back to what she was saying about education. We have the same issue where we get a lot of patients who come in and a lot of transfer patients who already have their cards they lack the basic cannabis knowledge that they should have. So I'm curious as to what education initiatives, plans, strategies that you all have, because not just the patients, but the ones that you want to sway over to our side to change their minds and give them the proper information that they have to potentially change their beliefs on cannabis. What plans do you have to getting out to the public, just the general public, and getting them that information?
Yeah, that's delve into. Do you want to?
That's a great question too. One of the things I joke about is when anybody wants to come work for Move, they think, "Ooh, I'm going to work for a dispensary." They have no idea they have to take a months-long chemistry class before they're allowed to actually go on our floors. So we pride very much the fact that we train our people before we turn them loose on anybody. But interestingly enough, by the time a patient comes to my dispensary, they've already been to you all. They couldn't come to me unless they've been to you all. So when we move into adult use, if we do, that will change slightly because we will then start having people show up directly to us, like you said, that don't have any knowledge. It is our responsibility, and we take very seriously the training that we do for our employees to make sure that they're able to speak to them. We have consultation rooms, we will sit down with them, we do Zooms, we will do whatever we can to try to educate them. But honestly, that's a company by company thing.
If I may, Florida Cannabis Action Network has been advocating from almost the get-go that every physician in the state take continuing medical education credits in cannabis medicine. Just like to keep your license, you have to do a few hours on domestic violence. Every few years, you have to do something on AIDS, HIV. You shouldn't be allowed to practice in this state where medical marijuana is the law without having some understanding. One of the things that Florida Cannabis Action Network does for its business members is we allow you to brand literature that we've already created. So if you check out our booth, you'll find a primer on the endocannabinoid system, a primer on cannabis and aging, a primer on new patients moving into this space. We don't need to brand it as Floirda Can. We'll be here when you guys are gone. We were here before you got here. And at the end of the day, we want your patients to have the best information. So as a business member, we do that as a courtesy.
I'm Dr. Mark Berger from the Clearwater area, medical cannabis prescribing physician for Dr. Block. I have a opinion and possible answer, which I think you know. There is a problem with other healthcare providers having DEA licenses who may think that because I'm a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant and I can write DEA 3s, I can write prescriptions for medical marijuana under the federal DEA 3 license I have, and the patients can take them to Trulieve or Move and get them filled, or maybe even take them to Walgreens. Now, what I propose is a very simple amendment to be thrown on top of any other Florida amendment that says, regardless of the federal status, in the state of Florida, only certified prescribing osteopaths and physicians may prescribe medical marijuana, which may only be filled through approved medical marijuana dispensaries. Theoretically, right now, a nurse practitioner can write a prescription for dronabinol or Marinol, and it can be filled at Walgreens. So there is precedent for this happening. There is also precedent for some states unapproving drugs in their states, mifepristone, of course, in Louisiana. So I would like to see us, you, the legislatures, come up with a simple amendment that keeps the status quo. Only a licensed physician or osteopath may prescribe controlled marijuana in the state of Florida, and only an approved dispensary may dispense it. And a regular pharmacy, a nurse practitioner, cannot write a prescription on a piece of paper and expect Walgreens to fill it for a joint.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, since you directed it to me.
Yeah, and Dr. Buck, I think I saw on your slide too, you had a do no harm. Nature itself is the best medicine from Hippocrates, so maybe you want to incorporate that into your answer.
I will in just a moment, but I want to point out, my colleague sitting right next to me is a naturopathic physician, recognized in Arizona, where he started, in many states in the United States and most of Canada. His knowledge base of plants' health and wellness is far superior than allopathic physicians and most osteopaths as well. But you're right, Florida law very specifically only recognizes, at least in this field, Florida licensed MDs and DOs, allopaths and osteopaths. There are not so intelligent MD osteopaths and allopaths, and there are very intelligent naturopaths. But you know what? Most naturopaths who want to come and live in Florida and practice, they become dietitians in hospitals, right? Isn't that so? So it's carved this out because Florida law is very specific this way, and yet you think it's just about us. It's still about who's well equipped, whether a nurse practitioner and a naturopath, an osteopath. It's all part of the rulemaking and the discovery process with this. And finally then, Eric brought up, I did have a slide, and it showed at giving the oath of medicine. This was in 2015 at UM when I did this, and I used a quote up top that said, nature is the best physician. Well, people ask me all the time, well, Doc, you're in this field. Remember, first do no harm, it's the oath. Got news for you, folks. First do no harm, while attributable to Hippocrates, is not about the oath of medicine. It's not in the oath of medicine anywhere. It was in a different set of writings from Hippocrates called of the epidemics. In ancient times, there were epidemics, and the healers, before MDs, DOs, or naturopath degrees, were responsible for doing the right thing in context with epidemics. That's where first do no harm comes. And the real message there, Mark, and everybody here to hear this, is that yes, it's not in the oath, but it is a key point. And it really means that in a crisis situation, especially like in an epidemic, physician healers should neither overestimate their ability to treat and heal, nor underestimate their capacity to cause harm and make things worse. So it's sobering, but it's really very appropriate in the cannabis context, because while there's plenty of good that can come from it, there are obvious public health consequences, sometimes to those people in society that are least able to defend themselves. And as physicians, we're here to make judgments, to try to direct people to a safe course, usually with, like any other drug, and I think you'll see this emphasized more, you start and you develop with the minimum effective dose. That way you avoid the side effects. That way you don't get problems. I could give you so much water or oxygen you think is so essential to life that would kill you. So dose means everything, and I'll put it in this term because this is from an ancient pharmacist who's the father of toxicology, who famously said, sometimes the dose defines a poison.
And just
Question here.
The word physician is actually used in the constitutional amendment. So
Ron, talking to Mike.
Chiropractic physician. The legislature then can define that term physician, yes sir, but the way that they chose to define it up to this point has been MDs and DOs only. Nurse practitioners, they actually had something go before the board where they were trying to see if that could be delegated to them, and the Board of Nursing actually said no. So there is precedent there. The intriguing question, you're right though, when it comes to changing to Schedule 3, I doubt this legislature is going to open it up for more people, but I guess in theory, anybody that could write a Schedule 3 in theory would be able to, but I don't think the Florida legislature is going to allow that. Just my opinion.
I agree. I'm glad I went after him because I'm actually picking back off of that same discussion of the Schedule 3. Mine's more speculative versus a question or concern, but I think will be a good discussion at some point, would be with Schedule 3, as in mentioning nurse practitioners and other people being able to prescribe that. Do we see Big Pharma trying to actually create a space to come into the cannabis space by changing it to Schedule 3? Is that in speculation? I haven't really heard that in this morning's discussion, although we've been talking about legislation all day. That is the immediate connection I made when changing it to Schedule 3. Is that in discussions? Are we talking about that when we're lobbying? Is that something that is in our discussions at all with it becoming Schedule 3, if and when?
And I know we're all speculating about all of this, but I think that we've spent too much time and effort carving out these medical cannabis programs state by state, and that they are going to remain. If the pharmaceutical industry is going to try to get in, they're going to try to get into the framework that has already been built.
My joke always has been the reason they don't do it now is because it's Schedule 1. So I've always kind of years ago, I was jokingly saying the day that this gets either rescheduled or descheduled, they're going to try to come in and buy us all out. But then I started thinking, but they can't patent it, but they can't get a 7-year brand. So do we start getting into all of those things downstream? I don't know the answer to that, but I have a feeling that might be part of the negative side that I talked about going to Schedule 3. So it's all speculative. It really is. Just
On certain cannabis already?
yeah, and then the coolest tattoo I've ever seen is somebody actually had the patent number tattooed on their arm.
So wouldn't that lead to a beautiful opening of that, since those patents are already there? They're just, and again, it's speculation, but it's there.
The VA is not going to be handing people baggies. It's just not real. But the Veterans Administration understands that there is a huge subset of veterans who would benefit from this. We are seeing molecular medicine. We do have FDA patents on cannabinoid medicines, formulations. So you're getting FDA approval on a cannabinoid formulation, and once you have that patent on a cannabinoid formulation, insurance company is going to cover it. When the insurance company covers it, Walgreens going to have it. Protecting access to the plant is part of what Cannabis Action Network has been doing. I do want to say that I've been doing this a very long time, and I realize we're almost out of time. One of the things that saddens me is the way we have forgotten that the enemy is private prisons and drug testing. The enemy is not the over-the-counter industry or the MMTC industry or the doctors. We need to keep our eye on the prize, and we've got to come together to understand that there are an awful lot of people out there that can benefit when we come together and present good quality products.
Yeah, and so I think Gene wants to wrap it up. I'd say get involved if you want more education and help. Charles, come over to the booth in the back. We have a little survey. What are your top 5 issues? Let us know. We're going to continue to talk about those like we have been for the past 10 years.
We need to keep doing it.
Yeah. So, but I mean, listen, we keep making, things have continued to get better. We need to have that continue in the same momentum. We're not trying to move backward with any of this, so.
First off, let me say I think we could have started with opening panel and just done the rest of the conference with Q&A. Thank you, panel. Wonderful opening. Really, really appreciate it. We are at break. I know they're not going anywhere for just a minute, so if you want to grab them before they get out of this room and talk with them. Otherwise, we're at break, refreshments next door in the exhibit hall. Thank you.